for inviting us along to today. I'm John Lawson, the regional archaeologist for City of Edinburgh Council. I'll try and talk about the construction work upstairs or wherever it is. Today's project is really a culmination of maybe about 3 or 4 different researchers. Really is a partnership project. As you'll see at the end, there's probably 12 organisations collaborated on this, and it brings together how can I say it shows the benefit. I think was it Lynn said this morning was in Norton Priory. It highlights the benefit of having collections that we can actually do research on, and human remains in particular. Today, I was going to say she did a sort of the usual. There will be human remains, but I'm not going to give you a warning. There's going to be some very dodgy 1970s fashion and hairstyles at one point. So for anybody who's offended by that, please look away. I apologise. So the first half of the talk is really, I'm just going to look through some of the archaeological science that we're doing. It's an ongoing project, looking at, so hopefully publishing within the next year or two. Obviously with HES, our listing is going to be published next year. But we're working with the Crick Institute on ADNA. You'll see some of the results. We're still waiting quite a lot of that to come through, which are potentially very exciting, as you might have heard recently. Also be working with Orsolya, Czére and Cape Breton up in Aberdeen University on isotopic analysis. So I'll talk a wee bit about that. So it's bringing together really science on an old project that my predecessors excavated and I helped published. So without further ado, for those unfamiliar, and shame on you, Edinburgh is the capital of Edinburgh. And this is St. Giles Cathedral. The reason we're here today is really speaking to our archives. There's a slight debate, but in Ascension 1124, we decided that's when the Edinburgh was founded as a borough, potentially by David I or his father. So, like all good archives, and shall we say, records at the time, it's a bit dubious and up for debate. But we decided it's 1124, and in so we've basically had over the last couple of years Edinburgh 900 project, and it also coincides, happily enough, with the foundation of St. Giles Cathedral. So we thought, well, I better get ahead of the game and let's look at a project. So as I said, we excavated the site in 1981 largely. We published it 20 odd years ago, but by that time, that was a sort of an archive project, Black Law project. So we didn't really do a lot of science, really good forensic report and quite a lot of really important archaeological report itself. 5 phases of burials, each roughly 100 years old. So can we get an exhibition together using our science and the work that Maria's been doing, our colleagues up at Aberdeen do facial reconstructions, and actually throw a big public engagement exercise and exhibition. So Giles are really happy with it. So we're going to be hosting it there, and you'll see that the second half of the talk's going to be discussed about that. So you can see Edinburgh there, St. Giles happily in the middle. I'll have to say that Edinburgh did exist before 1124. We didn't just suddenly appear, but that's the formal idea. Thankfully, Gordon of Rothermere was a very good cartographer and did a map of Edinburgh, which is actually really accurate. This is 1647, but essentially it is the medieval town. You got to the right of the picture, the Cannon Gate, which is effectively a separate borough through most of the medieval period run by the church. And the very crowded part is Edinburgh's old town, basically the state. So it's just really giving, and St. Giles is right in the middle. And probably in 1124 was on the edge of what would have been an English parlance, a Saxon, Anglo-Saxon town. It's complicated in Scotland, like most things, about whether it's actually probably a Scottish town at that time. Well, sorry, Scottish, but whether it's run by the Scots. So that's really a key place. So rapidly through, you see some of the results. So uncovering first burghers. So one of the questions were the initial phase of burials dated back to the 12th century. So we have Edinburgh's first burghers, we'll have a pun. So you can just see roughly on the phasing, and the excavation is on the top corner of the site. As I say, you can see the nice 5 burial phases going through it. Approximately 113 to 115 intact burials. So, and it's been published, you see, on Czére, Society of Antiquaries Internet report. So if you want to read on it, feel free. So what do we do? So we you might say, well, we got 5 phases over 100 years, but what can we actually learn? Can we actually refine that a little bit more, look at archaeological research? So yes, thanks to Archaeology Environment Scotland who gave us a lovely grant to help with the exhibition, but also to do a lot of radiocarbon dating, which we're going through a second phase right now. We were able to refine the phases. You can see external burials and external internals. Effectively, what happens, we've got a nice Norman church. I got watch for the audience. Basically, the English came off roughly in the 14th century and demolished Edinburgh a few times. So well, it happened. So effectively, so we have a series of external graveyards that are now internal. Trying to explain that to people is quite fun. And then during the 14th century, church got massively rebuilt. And you see the church you saw today, that's a Victorianized, cleaned up version of effectively a 14th century church. So you can see the main phases, and phase 3 and phase 3A. I don't know why we didn't call that phase 4, but that was probably without my ken at the time. We're refining that further. So the project itself, the exhibition, was really looking at reconstructions. It was phase 1 and 2. We had a couple of pilgrims in phase 3A, which we now redated properly to the 15th century rather than 14th, and looking at a very interesting group of women buried in Our Lady's Isle in phases 4 and 5 in the period, the 100 years before the Reformation. So we're looking at Edinburgh's people and trying to put a story on them. That's the whole part of the project. So just going roughly through the excavation, you can see from that a lot of people were very ill when they died. It's an oxymoron, but they were. We have a lot of pathology coming through. Interesting is to St. Giles. St. Giles is patron saint of leprosy and various other ailments. So you can see there we've got early lepers coming through here. So that's just really interesting to go through that. We're looking not so much at forensic evidence, but hopefully the DNA will turn up some evidence for diseases, etc. Linking into the sort of Paget stuff that was being discussed earlier on. Phase 2, well, after 100 years, reckon that the church is probably completed around about 1170. Oh, sorry. And to coincide with that, they put in a new graveyard soil, sealing the first lot, and then we got another early burial phase. Luckily, if you go back just quickly, 2 of the burials, 106 is actually, those 2 people were actually alive during when the church was built. So we got actually evidence of people who were alive in the 1120s. One was actually very early and being reconstructed by Maria. So just quickly flying on. The phase 3A, the 2 bits, we're going back to look at more work at those now because of the results, but we had 2 pilgrims. Why do we say they're pilgrims? Well, they got the bases of the metal staffs, buried now inside the church for the first time. And we're dating them really to the period around about 1460, really towards the end of the period. This is we have been using other reconstructions. This is Alan Braby, who's maybe known to quite a few. So his is the main reconstruction. It is very busy, but they're showing the evidence to try and explain what a pilgrim looks like in the 15th century. They've got the uniform. We've got the base of effectively a staff. It's a very pointy iron thing for basically hitting people when they attack you. But they got, so that's the evidence for it, but they're very unique. I mean, there are only 2 found in Scotland. I think there's only half a dozen found in the whole of UK. And there's a couple of examples, obviously, from Europe. So it very tells that story. And with a bit of archaeological history, there's potentially links to pilgrimages down to south of France and then on to St. James in Compostela. Because at this time, 1460, just afterwards, the Preston family built an isle and brought back one of the arm bones of St. Giles himself. And counter to some bad journalism 10 years ago, the arm bone of St. Giles was not found in the loft of the cathedral, despite what they said. So this is really going back onto the phase 4. One of the stories, we've got the top altar of St. Anne. That chapel is to the Tailors Guild. You can see a very mixed assemblage. It's very dense occupation, about 48 burials of all ages, actually. And just below it, Our Lady, basically all but one of them are women and all buried in a single phase of all ages. So it's really, who are these people? And it's really confirmatory of probably quite rich Burgess, wives of Burgess or rich members of Edinburgh society. So it's really interesting to look at those, try and what's the story about why were they buried there. Preliminary results, well, the ADNA is being worked upon and we're chasing up at the moment. So that's what we hope. It's been really useful so far in actually determining the real sex of the burials, most of which was known from the human remains themselves, but the juveniles and teenagers weren't happy, wasn't obvious, so it's helped in that. You might have read recently, we got the first evidence of the pathogens for the Black Death from phase 3. This is not part of our project, but it is now becoming part of our project, which is really exciting because the advances of ADNA is going to be fantastic. Looking back at all the cemeteries is actually understanding the health of society at the time. I'll just let you quickly read through that. And then, then I'll just go through a lot of these quite quickly. Pardon me. Obviously, the isotopic work has been, so one of the research questions about where do people come from and what's their diet. Orsolya, CECAS in Aberdeen, has been fundamental to this as part of a wider project with Edinburgh Trams and her PhD. Effectively, most people come from around Edinburgh, which is a bit disappointing. But it's good, as in the lowland Scotland, effectively. But we do have outliers. We're actually going into individual pathology, so I'm going to rapidly go through this. This woman here, skeleton 103, she's, although I'll just go through some of the broad science. We can catch up later. One's missing. Effectively, what I'd say, when they look at where origins come from, to talk about the Northern and the Western Isles, but intriguingly, she's actually buried in the Norman period of 1100s. So you can see down the south coast, sorry, not Kent, but just along from it, she may come from that part, which actually might be a more interesting way, more logical way of looking at it, because we've gotten this big influx of Normans coming into Scotland at that time. David I had been married into captured, but the royal family's married into it. The Norman big families like the Bruces are coming through to Scotland. So that could be, you can never be for sure, part of that story. And then I'll hand over to Maria, who's going to go through the public engagement side.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, good. Amazing. Thank you. So my name's Maria. I am an associate professor at Edinburgh College of Art. So I'm an art and design practitioner. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not a museum professional. So I'm one of the charlatans, maybe, that you were speaking about earlier. But most of my kind of art and visual practice has related to science in some way. So usually forensic science and criminology, but this has been my first foray into archaeology, which has been really, really exciting. So I'm going to talk about the process really of the facial reconstructions. So as John mentioned, this was a very collaborative, very interdisciplinary project. And what we really wanted to do is kind of bring the public with us on this journey and kind of create sort of visibility and humanity and identity for some of these individuals. So taking the archaeological data, taking the isotopic analysis, taking the DNA, and kind of mixing that together to create these sorts of personal stories. So we were using kind of digital technologies and tools. We were using specialist 3D scanners to take different sorts of scans of the obviously very heavily fragmented specimen we were recovering. We then use a very specialist 3D sculpting software, Geomagic Freeform. So we import the 3D scans into this software. And then we have a kind of interesting little haptic arm device. So it's kind of like a pen, but it allows us to actually physically touch the 3D scan from the physical realm. So just in the same way we might sculpt with our hands, traditional clay, we're kind of doing that with these 3D reconstructions. Oh, I definitely have more slides than that. I think I pressed end by mistake. Okay, well, I'm going to very quickly go back. Or not. I wonder if I can just skip. Sorry about that. 2 seconds. There we go. You get a little preview of everything that's to come. Something's not happy here. There we go. Okay, perfect. So just to kind of really briefly talk you through the process here, we have our 3D scanned skeletal fragments. We then try and kind of reassemble those as best we can digitally. We do have missing pieces, so we do try and kind of mirror, parts of the mandible we can see in this example, but we try and kind of, make that a different color or something just to maintain sort of that procedural methodological integrity. We then apply facial soft tissue depth markers, which essentially act as guiding blocks for the application of the muscles. So we're using our understanding of facial anatomy and facial kind of aging and growth patterns, but also all of the population data John was mentioning, the biological sex, the estimated age at death, and the kind of isotopic analysis in terms of geography and location. We then kind of pool and sort of form and sculpt these digital muscles around the morphology and the contours of the skull, which really again acts as a guide for us to apply the skin and the individual facial features. And then we get this slightly unsettling face that sort of, never looks quite sort of right. It's kind of alien-esque, but it's the truest possible representation of the face, based on what the skull is telling us at any given time. Now, the final kind of texturing is where there's probably most visually the jump in the process. It goes from this sort of beige face to the final textured portrait. And in any forensic cases we would be working on, we do try and create grayscale portraits. We try and minimize any external facial features that we might not be sure of. We do have a little bit more creative freedom in archaeology because it tends to be a little bit more around public engagement, engaging people with historical figures of interest. So as John mentioned, we have had some of the ancient DNA back to be able to allow us to determine things like eye color, skin color, hair color, but there are certain things that we obviously still don't know. And we also have some really interesting personal finds that where visible, where available, we can incorporate those into the reconstructions. So these are our final 5 portraits of the individuals selected. And for each of these reconstructions, we try to depict them in a kind of more neutral, contemporary stance, almost, as these individuals may appear around contemporary day Edinburgh. But based on the information we knew, as John mentioned, in terms of maybe where they were buried, their social status, their diet, etc., their mobility, we also tried to create maybe a more historical reconstruction based on how they may have presented at the time. So lots of really interesting aspects that we can incorporate into the reconstructions too, from status, skull number 16, for example, John mentioned being probably quite a high status individual, through to the gentleman second to the end there, skull 110, presented with a very large osteosarcoma under his right eye. So we were able to kind of visually depict how that cancerous tumor might have presented in the kind of surface anatomy when alive. The exhibition we created was actually in St Giles Cathedral, and we really wanted the people of Edinburgh, but also international visitors, to see this project as not just a kind of place of worship, but somewhere that was fusing science and worship, and actually see the cathedral as a contemporary museum, a museum for the city. So we had the traditional display panels and boards guiding people around, and we had a visitor experience survey. But we also decided to use artificial intelligence to animate the facial reconstructions. And we worked with an independent visual artist to project these all around the cathedral on the various pillars, walls, paintings, and enclaves. So you can see some of the faces sort of moving, changing facial expression. And we projected them as close as possible to the burial site where they were first recovered. So people could actually walk around the exhibition and sort of stand where some of these first burghers themselves may have stood. So trying to create a really immersive experience. We also worked with documentary filmmakers to create a short 16-minute documentary, which you can find on YouTube and on the St Giles Project website. So this really kind of goes into much more detail about the kind of historical history of St Giles that John talked through, the archaeological digs, the kind of isotopic analysis done by our colleagues in Aberdeen, and also the ancient DNA and radiocarbon dating done by the Francis Crick Institute. So all the lovely science, a lot of which is very above my head, but also it documents the facial reconstruction process, which is much more what I've been involved in terms of how we use all of that scientific data to then create these reconstructions. So that was displayed in the cathedral as well as online. And we've also tried to sort of just do some more light-hearted things. You know, the cathedral is very important as a contemporary museum and the kind of context and its place right at the heart of the Royal Mile. But we also wanted to bring this out and engage people beyond the cathedral walls, particularly those that maybe traditionally wouldn't engage with archaeology in traditional museum settings, or might think they might not be interested in it, but we know better. We know that they are. So this is myself and Mettje Hunneman, who was the lovely visual artist we were working with on the projections. So this was the closing to the Edinburgh 900 celebrations that John mentioned. So a whole year of celebrating 900 years of Edinburgh as a chartered borough and of St Giles Cathedral. So we tried our best to dress up as medieval citizens, and we had kind of 3D printed skulls as well as some banners that we kind of carried throughout the streets from the Scottish Government up to St Giles, ending at the cathedral where the exhibition is hosted. So again, that was kind of 30,000 visitors, I think, local and international. And I believe that the cathedral themselves. Oh, I gave away the big reveal. um, the cathedral itself has seen an estimated 2 million visitors. I'd like to say that was just because of our exhibition, but the exhibition ran for 6 months, including over the International Fringe Festival. So it was really lovely to engage local and international audiences. But we have really tried to bring the public with us on this journey. We've tried to sort of engage with local and international press and media. We've tried to write about this. The exhibition was launched by the Lord Provost of Edinburgh, and as you already know, we did have a royal visit. I'd like to say they came specifically for the exhibition, but you can see, if you look closely, the exhibition in the background there. So just to kind of wrap up in terms of next steps, a little bit of shameless promo. We are still open until the 30th of November, so you do still have a couple of weeks to visit, or you can watch our documentary online. We are doing kind of the traditional academic thing, a few presentations and publications, but we will also be analysing more thoroughly the insights from our visitor experience survey, because we really want to know what the impact of this kind of art science approach has been on our visitors. Have they learned more about the people of medieval Edinburgh, and how did the facial reconstructions and the exhibition help them understand the science? We're also going to be looking into developing kind of some impact films. We've found film and visualization and animation to be a really engaging way of bringing the public with us. And yeah, always kind of looking for opportunities to chat to and share the work with others. So just a final big thank you to all of our partners. And there's been many, because we're just,
Yes.
I think, as was said, we're just two of the rest of them. So
Standing on the shoulders of giants, including Maria and everybody there. And most important, it's also the people of St Giles Cathedral who have actually been fantastic throughout the project and really bought into wanting it there. The staff there have been commenting about how visitors have seen a new element and actually stopping and staying and sitting down watching the film. So, and it's also just bringing a museum collection out of a museum and shoving into a new venue, which is it's just really exciting. And I'd just like to end it there. Thank you very much.